All right, so have you all chosen your victim for today? Okay, before we start on your chosen person to make your argument for your group, we have one person who needs to introduce themselves so I can give them the credit. Didn't get to hear last time to play Marketing Survivor, so you get to stand up and introduce yourself and sell yourself to the class. And we played Marketing Survivor to determine whether or not people got to stay or had to go last time. So I need you to come over here so you can give them
in front of the class.
in front of the video.
Definitely.
All right, so go ahead and sell yourself.
So my name is Taylor Barnes. I'm a senior in marketing. I work for T-Mobile, so I'm part of the Uncarrier experience. If you guys are with T-Mobile, come see me at the mall. I'm better than everybody else. I moved to Oklahoma City a couple years ago. I'm from Altus, Oklahoma, a little small town, has an Air Force base and nothing to do. So I definitely enjoy being in the big city, being able to go to concerts and stuff. I'm really excited to take this class. Like I said, I sell phones, so I'm hoping it has something for me to get out of it that will help me in my job and as I move up in the company and things like that. I'm excited to work with y'all, and yeah, that's me.
I actually think that was one of the better pitches. You did a really good job of selling yourself and giving a shameless plug to your company.
Of course,
so,
gotta get that money.
You know, networking, the ability to try and make more money is always a good thing. So before we start, I'm going to give you an opportunity here for individuals to earn some bonus points if you can answer some questions. I like animal shows. How many of you have gone to an animal show like at the zoo and seen the sea lions? That they get to do tricks for fish. I have a pet squirrel. We've gotten her trained to do tricks for food. The tricks get better with the more expensive the nut that we give her. She really is very, very picky on her nuts. Her tastes correspond directly to her the prices in the grocery store. So we've got her trained to do some things. It's really entertaining to watch her do those. She knows 35 distinct words, which is more than some of you will know come test day. So we're going to see if I can get you to do some Pavlovian type of responses in exchange for not nuts or fish like the sea lions, but for bonus points on the first exam, which you'll want, because the average score on the first exam in here is about 65. So that just will give you some incentive to answer my questions and participate in the class discussion. There is an apocryphal story about W.C. Fields. So there's two questions here. The first person to raise their hand on each question will get 5 bonus points added to their first exam. Come see me after class to make sure that I get those recorded for you. What does the word apocryphal mean? If I were you, I'd start using it for phones.
Apocryphal.
What is the word apocryphal mean?
Okay, I found this.
Your hand went up first.
Doubtful authenticity.
Doubtful authenticity. Yeah, it's a story that may or may not be true, right? It's probably not true, but it's urban legend. It may or may not be true. There may be some grain of truth to it or something, but we don't know. The second question: who is W.C. Fields? I'm sure you all know.
Who is W.C. Fields?
All right, so we got it over here.
William Todd Deaconfield, or known as W.C. Fields, an American comedian, actor, juggler, and writer.
Okay, very good. So you found a way to use information to get information quickly and answer questions. Isn't that great? I know most professors don't want you to use your cell phones in class, but I know that you're doing it, so I might as well just give in and let you have that. So you two see me after class, you get 5 bonus points added to your first exam score. W.C. Fields was sort of this notorious, funny man, drunk in Hollywood, big, fat guy. Died before I was born, long before I was born. But I remember as a child watching some W.C. Fields takes on, Nick at Night or something like that. And so there's this story that he comes out of a bar in the middle of the day, and he's stumbling around, and a woman comes up to him and says, "Mr. Fields, you're drunk." And he says, "Yes, but you're ugly, and in the morning I'll be sober. Is that an argument? Who said no?
Well, I think it's like an opinion, like, what if she doesn't think she's ugly?
Okay.
Well, I guess it would be an
Well, it
argument
would be
thing,
an
so they
argument.
could just say that.
Is it an
But
argument?
it doesn't have to do with him being drunk.
Okay.
I think it
You think it's an argument?
is, yeah.
Why do you think it's an argument?
Because he could argue, well, maybe you only think I'm ugly because you're drunk, or he could argue, or she, whoever, could argue that, like, maybe only you think I'm ugly, like.
Okay,
you
so
can
maybe
find
she could
different
give
ways
good,
to argue it.
maybe she could give good reasons for her
Yeah.
opinion or his, sort of, negative opinion of her, all right, maybe. Technically speaking, that amount right there is not an argument. It may be a fight, but it's not an argument at that point. If they start going back and forth and talking about things, it may become an argument. Now, the quality of that argument is going to depend on whether or not they give valid reasons for their positions, for their ideas, or what we call premises. Students oftentimes tell me that they don't like arguments. And it's because they don't fundamentally understand what an argument is. They think arguments are about fighting. I imagine that if you said that to a woman today in the 1930s or whenever it was that W.C. Fields made this alleged comment to a woman, I imagine she might not have been as aggressive as to punch him or slap him. In today's modern times, you might get somebody who's highly offended and knocks your lights out. That's not an argument. That may be a fight, but it's not an argument. So students a lot of times, and particularly in this class, they tell me things like, I just don't like to argue. And they fundamentally don't understand what arguments are about. Sales is about making an argument. It's about giving good reasons why someone should buy your product or service. And so it is critical to learn how to make good arguments so that when customers challenge you with things that we'll call objections, and we'll talk a lot about that in here, you can give good reasons why they should accept your product or service for their purchase decision. So we're going to make arguments, and the way arguments are structured are you argue from premise 1 to premise 2 to premise 3 to conclusion. You may only have 1 or 2 premises depending on how sophisticated or lack of sophistication the argument is. And between these things, here and here and here, there should be some logical connection that we'll call a nexus. So what I've asked you to do today is to choose someone to engage in an argument with me about the importance of the history of marketing. So who wants to go first? Who wants to come up first and present their argument? Everyone gets to go, so might as well just, bite the bullet.
How you doing?
Doing well, how are you?
I'm good.
So, what's your argument? You need a eraser or a,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to think of 3 points real quick.
Okay. Gotta come up with 3 points. Is a history of marketing and selling important, given what we saw last time? I showed you all, for those of you that weren't here, there was some products that I showed you that are gonna replace lots of jobs in the marketplace, right? So, given that, is it important to have a history? I mean, nobody would have thought about, in W.C. Fields' time, nobody would have thought you could have a robot security
Right.
guard, right?
Right. So, off of the fact that you made the 50% of jobs are gonna be gone, we came to a general consensus that no, it's not important.
It's not important.
Because the culture has changed so much and the market's changed so much. So the ways that people sold things 5 years ago is completely different from it is now, or 10 years ago and before that. So because it's changing every day, we can consist that no, it's not important.
Okay, so is the sales process fundamentally different, or the way in which we sell things different?
The way in which we sell things.
So maybe is the process still an ancient process?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, very good.
Okay.
You can sit down.
Okay.
right, who wants to go next? What's your argument?
That we do go for it.
Okay, go ahead. Give me your pitch.
Okay. We think it's important because like, from back then, like you're gonna see what works and what doesn't work, so the future of your company, you're gonna know what to implement and what not to use, and like what was a positive effect and what was negative, so. Like going door to door isn't gonna work this day and age, cause people don't do that anymore, like you go on the internet to buy things, or you go to like meetings to get stuff, you don't individually go to each house to try and sell things, so it's kinda like stuff to like knock off your list on what not to use.
Okay, so you don't think going door to door is at all beneficial?
No,
No, completely?
I don't answer my
Completely.
doors.
You don't answer your door. If some stranger comes up, then why do the Mormons still do it?
No comment.
They're selling something, aren't they? What are they selling? They're selling their religion. I mean, it must be somewhat successful. They're one of the fastest growing churches.
Anyone I know doesn't do that, so I don't know. I guess everyone's different, but
What about this?
I mean,
Your
for-
argument is that nobody goes door to door anymore. What about in some place like India? Is door to door selling going to be more important there?
I've never been, so I don't know.
Don't know. What do you think?
I'm sure they will, because they're not as,
Does everybody in India have a cell phone?
no, that's what I mean, yeah,
Does everybody have access to the internet in India?
no,
No. So is it predicated on location maybe?
yeah. I thought this was just for like here,
Okay,
but
well, we got to
yeah,
think
if it's
globally.
like globally, then yeah, I mean, everyone's different though, so like we're more evolved than, Africa and like you say, India and all them.
Okay, all right, something to think about. I actually, in my principles of marketing class, last Tuesday, we did this marketing survivor deal, and I actually had one group that got booed. I was like, you people are fierce. I'm not sure I want to stay here with you. They actually booed one group. Okay, so what's your argument on the history of marketing?
Suppose we're going forward, the past is important.
The past is important. Why is that?
Because you can learn from their mistakes and the good qualities of the techniques that they use for marketing. So it's always a good learning lesson, and so you can modify what they did in a good way and then also change it to a modern day.
Okay, absolutely. The historian William Durant said that if you don't learn the lessons of history, you are doomed to repeat them. So if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're doomed to repeat them. I think that's a good argument. Okay, very good. What do you guys think?
So we argued kind of for both.
Okay.
We said that the history of sales in the business world is important for the postmodern world because history does repeat itself. And to progress and adapt to the new technological advances, we need to learn what worked best and what failed in the beginning of sales, such as, the production, industrial, or the marketing era. And like, for example of that, if you guys remember the commercial ad, like marketing is part of the advertisements, the Pepsi commercial, with Kendall Jenner. Yeah, that was a pretty failed attempt of it. So we learned from that mistake, then we can progress into that. But talking about like technological advances, a history of sales isn't necessary to learn about the postmodern world. And this is because most sales today are occurring through the internet. Therefore, with cookies on the internet browser and social media, they are able to show more ads through your social media newsfeed, which influences the buyer to make a purchase.
Okay. All right. So you think it's important, but to an extent. I guess, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I guess your argument is that yes, it's important, but you have to recognize the limitations of history in learning about and adapting to new technologies. Okay. All right. Very good.
So we've agreed that sales are important for the history of sales is important because we can learn from our mistakes. That way we can solve things in an efficient way, in a better way, and that might generate for selling. Selling is one of the oldest.
It's one of the oldest professions.
Those professions that you can see because it's how everything goes around. So if sales wasn't like one of those professions, so we couldn't learn from the past days, so we learned these days to be selling the same way. So I think the history of sales was really important, because if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be able to keep selling the way we sell. Also, if we do that, we can learn from our mistakes as well, let's say.
Okay, I think that's important, yeah, the idea that we have to learn from the past or you're doomed to fail it. You're doomed to repeat it and maybe have failure in the repetition of that. And the definition of insanity is what? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you don't learn from the past, you're going to do the same thing over and over again and maybe not learn from the results. Okay, very good.
We also said that learning about the history of sales was important. I mean, we've all heard everybody else mention that learning about history is important and whatnot to repeat the same mistakes from being made. What I wanted to say was that although technology is improving, that doesn't necessarily mean that sales isn't happening. Like, it's not everything revolves around technology. I mean, sure, a big part of it does, but there's still a lot of personal interaction and whatnot. And say, even if you worked in a company where all they do is talk about technology and whatnot, those that are on the upper scale, like the CEOs and whatnot, they're constantly pitching at other companies, trying to get them to buy stocks or whatnot, where like integrate and all that good stuff. So overall, I think it is important, not like even though technology is improving. And look at the class that we're sitting in, it's personal sales. If it wasn't important, then we all wouldn't be here, and Dr. Aguirre wouldn't be here.
Right, I would be teaching.
Dr. Aguirre is history itself right there.
Okay.
Sorry, not like that, not
I'm
like that, I'm saying like.
I'm not sure I'm liking your argument now.
I'm saying that he's history in itself, as in like he's learned from the past and whatnot. And obviously he's done really well because he's here.
Okay, well, that's shameless, promotion of your professor is always a good,
Yeah.
flattery will get you everywhere. Because, when I was married, my wife would say, "You're so shallow," and probably I am. So, it will probably work wonders. So, I think that's important, yeah, and as one of the things that you recognize that's important is that even though a lot of stuff is being sold online, when it comes to technologically sophisticated products, there is still a human element in it. How did you know you wanted the iPhone until somebody showed you at T-Mobile or Verizon or something like that, all of the great features that the iPhone can do for you? And so there is still a human element to this. And even though we're replacing the security guards, somebody has to sell that and convince these malls that this is a better way to go than the old way. And so sales is one of the areas where we see the fastest growing number of jobs. And most people will start their careers in a sales position, whether or not they even have a business degree. Most people will start in sales. Yeah?
Do you think influence is more a better way of like sales nowadays? Because you can have an interaction with the person that is selling, but if you have a friend that is next to you that has that product.
Yes, that's absolutely, yes. The what we call centers of influence are enormously important in sales.
So that why they use like celebrities a lot?
It is, and it's not necessarily terribly effective. I'm not sure that they, it depends on whether or not there is congruence between the celebrity and the product or idea that they're pushing. So I'll give you an example of this. For the vast majority of Hollywood, probably 95%, you can find exceptions to this, but the vast majority of Hollywood actors and elites and people like Oprah, and for those of you that watch the Golden Globes, what do you think their political affiliation is?
Party?
Yeah, what party do you think? They're overwhelmingly Democrats. You can find some exceptions. Clint Eastwood is a rabid Republican. He was the mayor of Westwood, and he was a Republican. I'm trying to think of some other notable Republicans in Hollywood besides Clint Eastwood. The kid from Growing Pains, do any of you know who he is? He played Michael Seaver, I can't think of his name off the top. Kirk Cameron. He's a rabid Republican. But by and large, the most part, Hollywood is full, chock full of liberals. And Donald Trump still became president. Because we don't necessarily think that because you are good on stage and we like you as an actor, that that qualifies you to give your opinion in the political realm, right? So yeah, I think it's important that there has to be some congruence between the product. When you see athletes advertising, for example, things like underarm deodorant, well, athletes sweat. They might be good at, you know, telling you like, I'm really stinky and sweaty when I go play basketball, and this, you know, degree really turns up the heat. But yeah, so I think there has to be a congruence. All right, very good. Anyone over here? Are we finished? Did every group get to go? I don't want to deny anybody the opportunity. All right. Well, I think, obviously, that marketing history is important, and I have quoted the historian William Durant, who says those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. But he also says that the only lesson of history is that nobody learns the lessons of history. And we can see this over and over and over again, that people make these sort of same mistakes over and over and over again, although good companies tend not to. They tend to behave differently than other companies. So it's important that I think we have an understanding, even if in many instances we see people repeating these same mistakes. And I think we should know that just because people do that they don't learn the lessons of history, doesn't mean that they shouldn't. There's a difference between what is actually going on out there and what should be going on out there. The vast majority of companies will fail in the first 5 years. Something like 95% of businesses fail within their first 5 years. And so the ones that don't, why is it that they don't? What can we learn from them, and how can we model after them? Why is this not working? There we go. Finally came up. So I think marketing history and sales history is important for our purposes. And there's also, I'm a philosophy guy, I'm a theory guy, and so I like theories. And so corresponding with this history, we'll talk about the various theories that we see that have emerged from the marketing discipline and have been impactful on sales. The first era is what we call the production era, or the production philosophy. This era can be summed up by a line from a very old movie that a lot of you have probably seen at some point in time, called A Field of Dreams. The first person, you get 5 points if you can tell me what the takeaway from The Field of Dreams is. Yes, what is it? If you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. Now, for most of human history, goods were very scarce. And so if you made anything, you could probably sell it. We don't know when the first society formed. We have echoes of this in various texts that sort of give us an idea of when we became social creatures, when we started to form into groups. You can see those echoes in books like the Bible. And if you want to know where you can see it in the Bible, it's in Genesis, and the story of the fall from grace, and Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and eating from the aptly named tree, the fruit of what? Knowledge. Fruit of knowledge. That's the point at which we see an emergence out of what we might call the primitive psyche and into what we might call social or societal man, as distinct and separate from the cosmos. So in these ancient societies, people started to come together, and they started to specialize, and they would trade, or they would barter. If I had chickens, I might have eggs, you might have sheep, and wool and meat, and we could trade for those things. And so life was pretty simple, and if I had chickens, you would probably want them. If you had sheep and wool and meat, I might want that. And so you didn't have to have a whole lot to sell something. And this is for most of human history. I know it's hard to believe a time at which you didn't have this device attached to your hand, because you all have grown up with these devices attached to your hand. And so, you know, we don't think much about it, but this is a relatively modern phenomenon. There used to be, when I used to teach criminal law and procedure years and years and years ago, there was a case in my criminal law book that dealt with the phone booth. And the last time I taught that class, I had to explain to a student in the class what a phone booth was. They had never seen a phone booth. How many of you have never seen a phone booth? Everybody in here has seen a phone booth at one point in time? Okay. Well, they're not very common anymore. They used to be on every street corner. You would have these things, these structures that you went into, because you didn't have this. If you wanted to make a phone call when you were out and about in New York City or, you know, London or Paris or Rome or any place like that, you'd go into these things, you would close the door behind you, you would insert, when I was growing up it was a quarter, when my mother was growing up it was a dime for a phone call, and you would, you know, actually the old ones had these rotary dials. How many of you have seen a rotary dial phone? Okay. They had these rotary dials and you'd make your phone call. So this goes on till about 1920. Now the fact that it ends, or we see a different philosophy coming about in the 1920s, doesn't mean that there aren't companies that still use this philosophy of if you build it, they will come. One of them that used this philosophy very successfully, and is a high-tech company, is Apple. Apple did nothing under Steve Jobs that we would tell you to do to be a successful business in the contemporary postmodern world. They were purely a production philosophy. They had this ancient philosophy in the most high-tech of companies. Steve Jobs' attitude was, you're an idiot, you don't know what you want, I'll tell you what you want. And by and large, he did. How many of you in this room have an iPhone? The majority. The vast majority of you have an iPhone. Why is that? Did Steve go out and interview you about what you wanted? No, he didn't. He just came up with it. And it was actually, if you think about it, I have one. And when they first came out, I was actually in the corporate world. I was an executive vice president for a publicly traded company, and we wouldn't use them because they weren't really very business friendly. We used BlackBerries. Why did we use BlackBerries instead of this iPhone? Well, the BlackBerry platform was enormously stable, and as a work device, it was actually far more user-friendly. Why? It had a full keyboard. And for those of us who can text or respond to emails by touch, that's much more easy to do than it is on an iPhone. Why?
You don't have like a physical keyboard.
Yeah, you don't have, can you actually text without looking at the device?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You know where the letters are on the device.
Like paragraphs.
Okay, that's pretty amazing that you can do that without, you know, I could actually sit there going down the road. I remember with my BlackBerry, I would hold it out in front of me on the steering wheel, and I didn't have to look at it to be able to answer text messages or emails at that time. So this is actually not a terribly useful device for business. What made it better, or what made it more popular, was that you could do more fun stuff on it. Ultimately, businesses caved and gave in and gave everybody this device instead of the BlackBerry, or the Crackberry, as I used to call it. Now we got the crack phone, because we're addicted to this. And studies show that you are addicted to this. How many of you have experienced phantom vibrations? Almost everybody. It's a big phenomenon now, where you're just so in tune to listening or feeling your device go off that you can't wait for it. We know that based on fMRI studies of your brain, that the part of the brain that is firing when you smoke a cigarette, drink a drink, take a hit of the bong, is the same thing that fires when you get one of these little jolts from this phone. When it goes off, and I can't wait to get away from people. can go figure out what, who just texted me, so that I can go meet up with my friends or whatever. So we have these, but in spite of the fact that this was really very, very different from everything that came before it when Steve Jobs introduced it, it was still a production philosophy. He didn't go out and ask people what they wanted, he just put it out there. Now that he's dead, Apple doesn't use so much of a production philosophy. And I'll give you an example of this. They actually do engage in marketing research because they don't have a creative genius, I guess, of the power of Steve Jobs in their executive suite anymore. So Steve Jobs said, for example, there would never be an iPad mini. We're just not going to make it. He said if you're going to enjoy this device, you have to have a certain amount of screen property to enjoy it. And the minute Steve passed, what happened? What did Apple do? They released an iPad mini. Why?
Because they had no ideas.
Because there was demand for it. A lot of the tablets were getting smaller, and people wanted a more compact device, and so they actually did start listening. But as long as Steve was there, they used the production philosophy, and they didn't really care about what you thought in terms of whether or not it was going to be hip or popular. Their attitude, we're going to tell you. Microsoft is another company that you could use. These are test questions, by the way, or potential test questions. Which companies still use the production philosophy? Microsoft is another one. Microsoft has foisted off really crappy software products for years, and they've gotten away with it. Why? Because they control what percentage of the market in terms of the OSs on computers. What percentage of the market do they control? 90%. Now it's dropping. When you control that amount of the market, you have nowhere to go but what?
Down.
Down. You have nowhere to go but down, and what's taking its place? Well, iOS, although a lot of people still can't afford to buy Apple computers, but what else is starting to take its place? Well, these devices are becoming more and more important, and these devices may be less so, because you always have this, don't you? You don't always have the big desktop or your laptop, and so people are actually using. So other platforms are starting to come to more dominance, and we'll see how long Microsoft can hold on. It's sort of like watching Walmart. Walmart was the biggest person. At one point in time, Sam Walton was the wealthiest man in America. Who's the wealthiest man in the world and the richest man ever now, according to Forbes?
LeBron James.
No. Huh? It's what? It's the Amazon CEO, and his name is Jeff Bezos. Right, yeah. He's the wealthiest man. Now, it's actually estimated by some people that Vladimir Putin may be the wealthiest individual in the world. It's estimated that he may be worth $500 billion. But we don't know because it's all in sort of illicit and illegal trade in many instances. But for what we know, Jeff Bezos is now the wealthiest man in the world. So during the production era, we had a lot of barter. The takeaway is if you build it, they will come. We get the sales era beginning in 1920 to about 1960. So what happens is, if you think about the Ford Model T, the Ford Model T was the first mass-produced automobile to be sold to a general public. Before Henry Ford comes along, there were cars. He didn't invent the car, and by the way, a lot of people think he invented the assembly line. He didn't invent the assembly line. There were assembly lines before Henry Ford, but he did do one thing that greatly improved the assembly line. What did he do that greatly improved the assembly line? The moving assembly, yeah, the moving parts of the assembly line. The older assembly line was they had workstations and groups of people would move to the product and work on it and complete it. He actually did the what? The moving, right? So rather than the worker moving to the thing, he updated the assembly line to have the parts and the things come to the worker as it went down the line and then ultimately out into production. Now, when he built the Model T, the saying was you could have it in any color that you wanted so long as that color was black, right? That was the thing. If you wanted a black car, you could have that. If that was your heart's desire, well, you were just in luck. Black is not a terribly wonderful color for a car, particularly in places like Oklahoma. Why?
Dirt.
Yeah, it's hot and they're dirty. if you have a black car, I had a black car at one point in time, I hated it. Because you would wash it, and then, as is happening today, the wind would come sweeping down the plains, as it so frequently does in Oklahoma. And we have this wonderful red clay, which makes great bricks, but also makes for a lot of dust, and so my black car was perpetually covered in a thin film, it seemed like, of red mud. And then in the summer, it was covered in a film of red dust and red mud, and it was also what? It was also hot. You'd come up to it, you'd approach it, you go up to a black car, and they're just hot. They just radiate heat. So I want a white car. Why did we accept the Model T? Well, at that point in time, it was better than the alternative. The alternative was a horse, a buggy. That's not great transportation. What happens to horses? They die. They eat. They can become difficult to deal with. They're unreliable. This was so much better. The Dodge brothers come along, and all of a sudden we're going to have more variety. In the Industrial Revolution, we see what's called the sales era emerge, where it's not about just if you build it, they will come, but we're going to have to go out and sell people on this. They're not just going to buy our mousetrap because we put it out there. We're going to have to come up with a better mousetrap, and we're going to have salespeople. Now, most of the pejorative attitudes we have about the selling profession come from this era. When I talk to students, and I'm sure it's no one in this class, but a lot of students tell me, I want to get a degree in business, but I just don't want to go into sales. And the reason that they say that is because they have this image of what a salesman is in their mind. I have gone from being an attorney, which is a widely despised profession, to another profession which is equally as ill thought of in many instances. And it's hard for us to convince students when I talk to them in my principal's class. I'll say, you know, if you want to get a good job, you ought to get a sales, or you ought to think about getting a sales degree. And the reason you ought to think about getting a sales degree is because we are the only degree program on this campus that can say we have 100% placement of our majors and our minors, and most of our students, 95% of them, will make six figures within the first 1 or 2 years after graduation. Nursing can say they have 100% placement of their majors, but they don't have a minor. So we're the only one that can say that we have 100% placement of our majors and minors, and I have more jobs than I have sales students. But the image that people get when I talk about sales, you know, they say, I want to get a business degree because I want to get a job. They know that if they go across the parking lot to the land of hippy dippy and get a degree from that college, they're not going to have a job, at least not in the field. Yeah. Let's get a degree in political science. What are you going to do with that? Nothing. I say this as somebody who has an undergraduate degree, by the way, in political science.
I was going to say, don't people do that before they go to law school?
That's the vast majority. And lawyers have, by the way, the highest number of people who go to law school, pass the bar, and then never practice law, because it's a miserable way of making a living. I know this from experience. So if any of you want to go to law school, come talk to me first. I will talk you out of, shoot you full of Thorazine and send you on your way. But, so students say, I want to get a degree in business because they have this idea that they're actually going to go out and be able to get a job, as opposed to someone who gets a degree in political science, or even worse, at least with a degree in political science, you can go to law school and you can have a profession. Sociology. What the hell are you going to do with that? Nothing. Nothing you can do with that degree. Worse yet, history. I guess you can teach. You better be able to coach, too. because, you know, that's what you're gonna have to coach to be able to teach and get a job. So they come to business, and they know that they want to get a degree in business, but they don't realize that probably they're going to end up in sales. Even those people that, you know, are, I don't know how you stay awake long enough to get a degree in accounting. I don't know how you do it. But even those people now the accountants are probably gonna get degrees. They don't have as high a placement as we do. You know, they're boring. I just can't imagine getting that degree. But, you know, the finance people, that's kind of interesting. Finance is interesting. You get a degree in finance. And what do you think you're going to be doing when you go to work for, you know, Morgan Stanley or T. Rowe Price? What do you think you're going to be doing? You're going to be selling. What are you selling? Financial products, financial services. Your first job is probably going to be sales. But we have this pejorative attitude, and it largely comes from this era of sales. And so when we say sales, people get this idea in their mind about what a salesman is, and it's generally wrong. It's generally based on the one experience that we all have that's probably the most horrific experience of our life. It's buying a car. How many of you have bought a car?
I'm a salesperson.
And you went in and you came out, and what was that experience like? You were just certain that you probably were what? Taken advantage of.
No, I felt harassed.
You felt harassed.
Screaming, harassing people.
Yes. You buy or you die, whatever.
You buy or you die. Okay. Or worse yet, maybe you've had the experience in Oklahoma of going to Mathis Brothers, where you have the shopper stockers as Bob Mills. Now Bob Mills is trying to sell himself as the antithesis of Mathis Brothers, which is we don't have any shopper stockers. And so you go into Mathis Brothers and there's this person that is on you. And it's annoying. And so that's what most people think of as being sales. And it comes from this era where what we were doing is we now have people besides just Henry Ford and Dodge in the mix. We also have Studebaker and all these other companies that come. And really what it's about is it's about using this old model of selling, which is the AIDA model, which stands for awareness, interest, desire, action. So I'm going to make a pitch. I'm going to get you interested, create a desire, and then get you to take an action, which is buy my stuff.
Isn't that what you're doing right now, though? You're talking about why we should be professional sellers, kind of, and you should listen to good reason, and you kind of shot down other agents. So and you stated a desire by saying, you're going to make 6 figures in 2 years.
Right?
You sell them.
You're going to have to do more than that. You're going to have to go beyond this. Yes, this is important. But under this old model, it was, let me make the pitch and go. Once I get your money, I'm going to move on down the road to selling the next person. And I may or may not be back in the next 2 years. All kinds of stuff was sold door to door. Fuller brushes, the Fuller Brush Company is still in existence today. You can still buy Fuller brushes. They were very kind of high quality brushes. You can buy them at Walmart now. But they used to have door-to-door salesmen that would go out and try to sell women hairbrushes. Don't do that anymore. What else was sold door-to-door? Knives. Vacuum cleaners. Vacuum cleaners were the big one. How many of you have seen a Rainbow vacuum cleaner? They were still selling those door-to-door up until the 90s. Electrolux. How many of you have heard of Electrolux? That was sold door-to-door. They were extremely expensive vacuum cleaners. You can now buy Electrolux ware. They've stopped selling them door-to-door. You can buy them at Best Buy. And they make all kinds of other stuff besides just vacuum cleaners. Electrolux now makes appliances and stoves and refrigerators. And so we're going to do this. And it's not that you don't want to build this, but you got to go beyond this to building a relationship. You still see this, we call this the transactional error as well. transactional sales. I'm just gonna get your interest, I'm gonna get your money, and then I'm gonna move on. Where do you still see this philosophy of selling being used? You see it at places like, my favorite event in the fall is the Great State Fair of Oklahoma. I get a season pass every year to the state fair, because it is just fascinating to me as a marketer to watch what people would rather have than their own money. I just go around the fair and there's these people that are in there, they think they share, or somebody, they've got this microphone and they're making their little pitch for their Ginsu knife collection, or the ShamWow, or some mop, or the stainless steel that they promise won't stick, and they lie to you. How do they lie to you? Well, they're using demos of the, stainless steel won't stick the first time you use it. You don't have to use oil on it, because it's kind of got a coating on it. But after that, it burns off, and there's a problem. I hate it. My brother loves stainless steel. All of his cookware is stainless, just god awful. God gave us Teflon for a reason. So, they make this pitch, they get their money, and what happens at the end of the fair? Well, they move on to the next fair. And most of the products that are sold there are things that you're not going to turn, how many of you remember Billy Mays? Billy's dead now. Billy sold all kinds of stuff. What was Billy's most successful product, probably? OxyClean. OxyClean. Now, is OxyClean a really wonderful product? It's pretty good. How many of you use it? How many of you use OxyClean? But Billy would have these demonstrations on television where grass stains, blood stains, ketchup, and he would just squirt a little bit of the OxyClean on this white cloth. And I don't know what they put in the OxyClean, bleach or something to get it to really come out. It's a pretty good product, but it doesn't work quite as well as Billy said it did. And they have a money-back guarantee. Now, of course, I've bought OxyClean, and I've had stuff that's had really ground in dirt, and it didn't really get it out, and it didn't work. It doesn't work very well, actually, on blood. I've tried it. On blood, it doesn't work as well as Billy says it does. But why don't I send it back? Well, because the product is not all that important. It's not that big of a risk if it doesn't work. One of the other things that I remember Billy selling was this stuff called Orange Glow. I have hardwood floors throughout my house. I live in a historic home in Guthrie, which is about 16 miles. That's my hometown, is Guthrie, Oklahoma, about 16 miles from here. And I have these hardwood floors, and they had this Orange Glow stuff that you're supposed to be able to squirt on the floor, and it would just restore them. What it has in it is it's not the oranges, that smells good, but it's got a little bit of polyurethane in it, in the Orange Glow, that makes the floor kind of shine. But Billy would have this sander, and he'd be like, look at what you can do, you can sand the floor and scratch it all up and pour a little Orange Glow on there. It doesn't work like that, and I bought it, I'm watching some late night infomercial, oh yeah, I gotta have that. And it didn't work nearly as well as Billy said it did, and I didn't send it back, even though there was a money-back guarantee. Why? Because it was more trouble than it was worth to do that. It cost me $5, and I'm not going to send it back. I'm not going to pay the shipping and handling to send it back to Billy and say, this product sucks. And it was okay. It cleaned all right, but it wasn't as wonderful. So a lot of this attitude that we have is from this era where people just sold all kinds of stuff, and they made the sale, and then they were gone. Why? Well, because they had to. If I'm selling Fuller brushes, I got to move on. If I'm selling vacuum cleaners, there's only so many times I can sell you a rainbow vacuum cleaner, and then I'm going to have to move on. And there were problems that occurred as this era was, full of people that were less than scrupulous in their sales. This is not what we're going to talk about in this class. Building awareness and stuff is important, but it used to be that what you did was the sales pyramid looked under this ADA model like this. You made a pitch, and then you spent most of your time closing. We now invert the pyramid, where we spend a lot more time in the introduction and getting to know, and far less time closing. It's far more important to build a relationship, not just make a pitch, get interest, and move on. It's about developing customer lifetime value. There are still companies that use this, though. What kinds of companies? Well, I've just given you examples at the fair. ShamWow, OxyClean, Orange Glow, Hercules hooks. That was the one product that Billy sold that actually did work. You can take these Hercules hooks, you can get them at Bed Bath & Beyond, and they really are great. You know, you can stick them in if you've got drywall, and they will hold about 150 pounds because of the design. They're one of the few things that was actually as wonderful as Billy told us it was going to be. So, for my next question, and I'll give you some time today to think about this in your groups, the rest of class, and I'll give you some time next time to finish up. I want you to think about, as we end the sales error and the sales philosophy, is marketing and sales, as a subfield of marketing, an art or a science? You need to come up with 3 examples in your groups. I want you to think about, is everything on a college campus an art or a science? Or is there a third possible category? What makes something an art or a science? What's the difference between them? So you're going to develop an argument. So is sales an art or a science? Your critical thinking challenge for your groups. For those of you that got bonus points, come up and see me. We'll do that. I'll turn the projector off. And I'll give you about 10 minutes in class next time, 10 or 15 minutes next time to finish this in your groups. And I will create a Dropbox for that as well. All right?